The Indiana Pacers are a young team flush with talent and an ascending superstar, and for those reasons, I believe the Indiana Pacers are going to take a huge step forward. Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we're going to deep dive into the Indiana Pacers and discuss what I expect from this team going into the 2023-2024 season. Now, a lot of work has gone into this video, both in grabbing video to show during this and also in some of the data collection, everything that goes into these videos. This is the first one of the offseason going into this next year. So if you're a Pacers fan, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more great Pacers content. And also, if you're a fan of a different team and you're just trying to see what's going on with the Indiana Pacers, make sure to request down below which team you'd like to see me do next, and I'll try and get to them as soon as possible. Really excited for this series. Let's jump into it with the most important piece of the Indiana Pacers organization to talk about, and that is budding superstar Tyrese Haliburton. And yes, I chose my words very adequately there for Tyrese Haliburton, who is becoming one of the best individual players in the NBA. I love this kid's game, and he's just a player who I think honestly is going to continue to take massive strides forward with the way that he thinks, the way that he plays, the way that he improves year in, year out. We've seen a lot of strides so far in Tyrese Haliburton's young career. So let's take a look at what he did this past season. And I think what he really did was ascend into being the new point guard of the NBA. And yes, I'm talking about a replacement of Chris Paul. As Chris Paul has kind of aged out of the NBA a little bit more, had a little bit of a fall off year, Tyrese Haliburton had a career season for himself in a bunch of different ways. If you look at the way his career has begun up to this point, he is on a great trajectory to being recognized as one of the smartest, best passing point guards we've seen play in the NBA. Very excited about this kid, and Pacers fans, I know you are as well. And there's a lot of discussion on Twitter about Tyrese Haliburton. You can tell who does and who does not watch the Indiana Pacers by that discussion. There's a lot of people who think Tyrese Haliburton's overrated. I'm going to be the first one to sit here and tell you he is underrated. And as me acting kind of like national media, of course, maybe not as mainstream as an ESPN, but still I cover all 30 NBA teams. I've got to tell you, Tyrese Haliburton is a really, really special player, and I love this kid. He is just so darn good at basketball. So let's talk about what he did this past year. He nearly averaged 21 points per game, which ranked 47th in the NBA. Now, that might not sound super crazy. Scoring was way up this year. Remember, Tyrese Haliburton is not just a player sitting on the wing looking to score the basketball. He is running the show for a rather complex offense, playing for Rick Carlisle. And to kind of show the benefits of that, he averaged over 10 assists per game this past year, which ranked second in the entire NBA. Now, one little issue I have with Tyrese Haliburton is, despite being super tall, lengthy, he doesn't hit the glass as hard as I would like to see him do, and I think he needs to take a step forward there. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows from me with Tyrese Haliburton. There's areas for him to improve. Getting on the glass a little bit more, helping his team rebound the basketball is one of those areas, but he's still an elite player. When it comes to points responsible for per game, which is the combination of points per game and assists per game and the amount of points that are actually generated through your assists, so 3 points for an assist if it's a 3-pointer, 2 points for an assist if it's a 2, Haliburton finished 6th in the entire NBA in terms of the points he is generating per game, both through scoring and passing the basketball, at about 48.1 points responsible for per game, which is elite. That is an elite mark. And Tyrese Haliburton, he's in the conversation with some of those other top-end creators, the Luka Doncic's, the Trae Youngs, the Nikola Jokic's of the world. Tyrese Haliburton is in a grouping with those types of players. And it really is a testament to how good of a player he is. And one of the things I really love about Tyrese Haliburton is how quickly he gets off the basketball, especially when he's in a spot of trying to make decisions for his team. You watch him operate the pick and roll. He doesn't sit on the basketball. He doesn't need 25 dribbles to get something done. In fact, he's pretty quick and decisive when he should be. I think he's going to be somebody who continues to grow, both when it comes to hitting the pick and pop, which he did a bunch of times with Myles Turner, but also some of the other things he does. He's just an all-around very cerebral player. gets his team out and running in transition. He's an awesome transition player, both as a scorer and a facilitator. Haliburton this last season only had a 23.8% usage, which isn't minuscule, but for a player of his caliber and with the numbers he put up, you would have expected that to be probably a little bit closer to that 30% usage rate. So Tyrese Haliburton deserves a lot of credit for that. He's someone who advanced analytics people would love. Tyrese Haliburton. He's kind of the darling of advanced analytics, with over a 62% true shooting percentage and an elite assist to turnover ratio at 4.15 assists for every single turnover he has, which again, when you're running the show, that is very difficult to do. Typically, we see a lot of backup point guards kind of in that role where they have high assists, low turnovers because they're getting their team into sets. Well, Haliburton's doing it as not only the starting point guard, but also the team's leading scorer, which is just remarkable work from him. He had 32 double-doubles this past year in points and assists. So he's a player who, honestly, he's just getting better and better every single step of the way. And then you also look at his points per possession in the pick and roll as a ball handler, which ranked 87th percentile in the NBA at 1.04 points per possession. He also passed on 52.1% of his drives, which shows that, hey, not only is he getting to the rim, he's trying to get into the paint and get paint touches, but he's making the right reads out of that. About 50% of the time, he'll end up taking a shot out of that. About 50% of the time, he ends up kicking the ball back out, which means he's reading what the defense is giving him and generating looks not only for himself, but also for others out of those drives, which is a great thing to see. And kind of going back to that points responsible for stat we talked about earlier, he had 27.4 assist points created per game, which means his teammates scored 27.4 points per game after receiving a pass from Tyrese Haliburton that would be registered as an assist, which is, again, just remarkable. Again, over 10 assists per game this past year. Tyrese Haliburton's one of the best young players in the league, and I think he's ascending into superstardom, where we're going to talk about him the same way we've talked about Chris Paul for the last decade and a half or so, as one of the best point guards in the NBA, period. That's the trajectory Tyrese Haliburton's on. He's bigger than Chris Paul. I think that there's more things he can do, arguably, than Chris Paul, and we'll see if that translates to even more winning than what we've seen from Chris Paul. And if we take a look at his shot chart here, I think there's a lot of different things that are worth pointing out. He's right now kind of a 2.5 level scorer. And what I mean by that is he's, first of all, very elite in the restricted area, which is a great thing to see. He shoots about 4 shots a game in the restricted area, which is pretty high volume for a guard. Of course, he's maximizing his size and length there a bit by getting to that spot of the floor, and he's shooting about 67% from the restricted area, which is a very good mark. That's what you'd expect from a bigger guard like Haliburton. He is shooting about 45% on paint shots that are non-restricted area. So you don't see a ton of shots from there typically in today's NBA anyway. He's shooting about 2 of those a game, and he's shooting 45% on those areas. That's, I think, a spot where he has to grow a bit. Also, the mid-range game. He's only shooting 1.4 mid-range shots a game. Now he's shooting them very efficiently at about 50% from the field on mid-range attempts. But this is where my criticism is a little bit. I need to see him shoot a few more mid-range shots a game. I need to see him shoot a few more paint shots a game that are not restricted area. And my criticism here isn't that he's a bad player, that he's, not taking good shots. For the most part, he takes excellent shots, kind of reminiscent of Steve Nash, the way that Nash used to play, where people would say, well, he should shoot more. That's kind of my same criticism here with Haliburton, is I just want to see this guy get more shots up, because I think he's a very talented scorer. He's a very good shooter. He makes a lot of his shots. I just want to see him put more shots up. And for me, it's kind of the combination of more mid-range jump shots, more shots in the paint that aren't all the way at the rim in the restricted area, and we're going to see his scoring numbers skyrocket from that 20.7 points per game all the way up to maybe 25, 26, 27 points per game, which is really kind of the definition of a superstar offensive player right now, a player who's putting the ball in the hole a ton, but then Haliburton's already got a leg up on the competition when it comes to diming and assisting his teammates, which he's very, very, very good at. And then the three-point shot, he shoots over 39% on above the break threes on about 6.3 attempts per game from above the break. He does not shoot a ton of corner threes, but he's very, very, very good at those, as you can see from the graphics. So Haliburton, just all in all, a great offensive player, and somebody who I just want to see him shoot the basketball more, and I think it's going to be really good for this Indiana Pacers team if he does so. Next, let's talk about Buddy Hield and Myles Turner. And no, I'm not talking about them as trade candidates, even though if you search Buddy Hield and Myles Turner on Google, this is what's going to pop up for you. More pictures of them in Lakers jerseys than Pacers jerseys. And that's because the mainstream media doesn't watch the Pacers that much. The Pacers don't get a lot of love. People don't really analyze what the Pacers do. That's the whole point of this video. So I hope you guys are enjoying so far. Let's start with Myles Turner, who had kind of a unicorn-esque season this past year, averaging over 2 blocks per game, which is already a really good elite number for a center. But then he also, if you look at his contest rate, was a phenomenal defender, especially with where he's typically contesting shots as a center. He gave up a 49% field goal percentage against him, which is really, really good. Contested 10.8 shots a game, which is a very high mark as well compared to some other centers in the league, which means he's an active defender. And 9 of those contests, a flat 9 contests per game, came inside the arc on 2s, and a lot of them were in the restricted area where he was still a very good plus defender. I think Myles Turner is one of the more underrated players in the league. I don't think people really understand what he does on the defensive side of the floor. A lot of people, when you hear the kind of discussion on Turner, it's, oh, well, he's a stretch big, he can shoot the 3. Yes, that's a great aspect to his game where he shot 37% from 3 last year. That's something you love to see from a big man. But he's a lot more than that. He protects the rim. He defends out in space decently. I wouldn't say he's at an elite level, but he's good there. He's not someone that you're going to say, uh-oh, we got Myles Turner out in space. You feel pretty decent about him compared to a lot of other bigs in the league. Oh, and by the way, he's an elite offensive player when it comes to efficiency. Shot nearly 55% from the field. He's dominant inside the restricted area as a play finisher. Again, that 37.3% mark from behind the three-point line, 78% from the free throw line, so you can't really even foul this guy and get away with it. And then he also is a really good screen setter. As a direct result from screen setting, he put in 1.24 points per possession as a screen and roll guy, which is very, very good, and that's a really good mark in today's league for Myles Turner, someone who you don't necessarily think of as a big rim presence guy. He still gives you that in the screen and roll game, of course, can pop out of that as well, which contributes to that number a bit. He's somebody who I think he's just a really good player. They used him a lot in different Spain actions. And I think Myles Turner is just a player who is super efficient in what he does, and I think he's a really underrated player because, again, most of the context on him is where is he going to get traded to? What team's going to ultimately acquire Myles Turner? I don't think we've spent enough time appreciating what this guy has been and what he has done for the Indiana Pacers, who, yes, I know the playoff success hasn't necessarily been there. They haven't won a playoff series since Paul George, but still, this team is dangerous. And I think that they're moving in the right direction, and Myles Turner's still in his 20s. He's not even approaching 30 yet. So there's a lot left in the tank for Myles Turner, too, in terms of progression. I still think there's areas we can see him grow. This was the first full year without Domantas Sabonis. And now going into this next season, hopefully him and Haliburton have even better chemistry, and the two of them could really skyrocket this team. As of right now, I'd probably classify Myles Turner as the second best player on the Pacers. I'm sure most Pacers fans would agree with me on that, but I do think there's some other players that are definitely worth talking about and what they did last season. And the first one to really mention here is Buddy Hield, who a lot of people think about Buddy Hield as purely a three-point shooter, and predominantly, yes, that's what he gives you. He's a sniper from behind the arc, but I'd even label him a sniper plus because he does a little bit of other things that I think really help an NBA team when it comes to winning games. First of all, let's pay attention to that three-point percentage. Nearly 48% on corner threes, which is a great mark, shows how dominant of a shooter he is, but he also shot over 41% on above the break threes, and he's got one of the quickest triggers in the NBA. As a result of that, he shoots a lot of open or wide open shots because if the defense is caught lacking even for a second, Hield is going to let that thing fly, and Haliburton usually does a good job finding him early and often when he is open. But then also in situations where Hield is somewhat contested, he still does a good job getting some of those shots off. He is not shy about pulling the trigger on somewhat contested looks. So Buddy Hield, the three-point shooting we all know about and what it does for the team and the spacing it provides, very important, I think, for building around a guy like Tyrese Haliburton. You know, I think that's an underrated component of the trade here between the Kings and the Pacers, where Haliburton went to Indiana, Sabonis went to Sacramento. Yes, that's worked out well for the Kings too, but getting Buddy Hield back in that trade is not a nothing. That's a really nice piece. He's a starting level player in the league, and I think the Pacers acquiring him, it's just a really good situation. Then you look at some of the other things that he does that people don't really talk about. Now, he only averaged 2.8 assists per game this past year, but based on the looks he generated, he had a 4.9 potential assists per game. I think he's actually somewhat of an underrated driver of the basketball. He's not elite in that category, but he's solid, which I think is not something you typically think of when you consider who Buddy Hield is as a player. And also the 5 rebounds per game, which is a really good mark for somebody his size. Again, I kind of critiqued Tyrese Haliburton earlier with only 3.7 rebounds a game, and this is why. Buddy Hield's out-rebounding Tyrese Haliburton. That should not be happening. I think Haliburton needs to hit the glass harder, but Buddy Hield, testament to him for trying to help his team rebound the rock on a night-to-night basis. Let's take a look at his shot chart now, and for Buddy Hield, again, we talked about kind of where he shot the three. He shot very, very well from both above the break and from the corners. Now, the volume wasn't quite as high from the corners. He does like shooting those above the break threes, but you also see some of the driving pressure he puts on the rim. Had a decent number of attempts at or around the rim this past year for the Pacers, so kudos to him for that. Definitely had a nice season for himself. And one other thing I want to talk about with Buddy Hield, he's somewhat of a leader on this team, and what I mean is more of a lead by example guy, where everyone kind of follows suit with what Buddy Hield's doing off of and around Tyrese Haliburton, as this team really likes to play through their creators, their point guards, the guys like Tyrese Haliburton, Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell. The team does a really great job playing around those guys. This past year, they finished 4th in the NBA on field goal made percentage assisted, which means out of all the teams in the league, they were 4th best in terms of how many of their shots were assisted on a percentage basis. So they do a good job playing through their facilitators. That's a big part of Rick Carlisle's offense, of course, and the team can shoot off of that. And you see my graphic here, shooting their shot. Their stats this past year, they attempted 37 three-pointers a game, which if you go back 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of. That ranked 7th in the NBA this past year. Of course, Haliburton plays a factor into that as well with how many threes he shoots, but they also shot an elite percentage, 36.7% from three, which ranked in the top half of the league as well. So you're looking at a top 10 team in terms of the amount of threes they take, then also a top 12, top 11 team in terms of their three-point percentage. So not only are they high volume, they're high efficiency, which generates good points per possession and a good offense that is very competitive in the league. They had 9 players on the roster this past season shoot 2.8 three-pointers a game, which is a pretty high mark. You know, just again, flashback 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of. At most, you had 2, 3, 4 guys maybe if you had a really good shooting team. They had 9 players. Guys like Jalen Smith were willing to step out, shoot threes. Of course, Myles Turner, Buddy Hield. Up and down the roster, the team was willing to let the ball fly, and I think that's a really good testament to how Kevin Pritchard and Rick Carlisle want this team built. They want shooting across all of the positions, and they want guys who fit off of Tyrese Haliburton, who again has a super high driving kick rate. Because of that, the Pacers are going to be a dangerous offensive team for years to come. Let's talk about Bennedict Mathurin, a player that I really do like. Bennedict Mathurin has a lot of really great elements to his game. As one of the more athletic young players in the league, he does a lot of really great things, especially with the ball in his hands and attacking downhill. The dynamism, the creation around the rim, the ability to kind of finish acrobatically in the air is almost unmatched from last year's draft. I was super, super high on Bennedict Mathurin coming out of Arizona. When the Pacers drafted him, I gave them, I believe, an A grade for that. And I think Mathurin really started the year hot as a rookie. Of course, his efficiencies came down a little bit. The team didn't do super great, especially in stretches that Tyrese Haliburton was out. We'll talk about that later. But Bennedict Mathurin's a player who I think has a ton of potential, a ton of areas to grow based on his existing skill set as a shot maker, shot creator, someone who can get downhill, drives the basketball very well at this point. I don't think the efficiency is quite there yet, but the fact that he's getting the sheer volume of drives that he is per game is a really great sign as well. But I think there are some existing flaws, which is what I want to talk about now. Shot only about 32% from the floor in the clutch. Now, first of all, he's a rookie, and this is somewhat low volume. So this is not an end-all be-all of, oh, Bennedict Mathurin's not clutch, but we're talking about some of the things he did not do well as a rookie. That was one of those areas where down the stretch of the game, and he had the same tendency in Arizona where he would force some plays and kind of make up his mind early. And I'm sure Pacers fans, you know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to forced shots or turnovers or not really just reading what the defense gives you, which is kind of the opposite of Tyrese Haliburton, which is funny. The two of them are almost polar opposite players. Then you also look at one of the big flaws and concerns I had about Mathurin coming in from his draft class. He actually shot worse this past season on catch and shoot threes than he did on off the dribble pull up threes. And you might say, oh, that seems like a weird kind of, we're not expecting that to happen again. No, this happened at Arizona too in both of his seasons with the Wildcats. Bennedict Mathurin is a rhythm player, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it does mean, okay, how is he going to play off of Tyrese Haliburton? Because when the Pacers are at their best, Haliburton has the ball and he's the one making the decision. So how does Mathurin fit off of that? Now, I think that still as a cutter, there's a lot of room for him to be a good impact player using some of his activity and athleticism, but I really think that he needs to take strides forward as a catch and shoot guy. Now, that 34.6% percentage on pull-up threes, that's ridiculously good, especially for a rookie, and something that I do think we're going to see Bennedict Mathurin, which, again, I'm a big believer in this guy's ceiling. I think he's going to be a potential all-star at some point down the road if his development goes in the right direction. Now, at worst, he's probably just like a very good starter or a good starter, and that's still an awesome thing to grab at pick 6 in the NBA draft. But the ceiling is there, and a big part of it is that some of those creation tools that he has, and a big part of that is creation towards the rim. Everyone thinks about creation as either, step back threes or pull up jump shots or passing the ball out off of a drive. First of all, just drives in general are creation. Getting your feet toward the paint or in the paint, it really puts the defense in a spot where they have to scramble and recover and defend in different ways, and you get them out of their shell defense. I think Mathurin's a player who's going to consistently do that in the NBA, and he was somewhat efficient on those drives this past year. I think there's more room for him to grow. 44% on drives isn't great. It's not near the elites of the NBA, but I do think that Bennedict Mathurin's a guy who, as the game kind of slows down for him, as he continues to get his feet wet in the NBA, he's going to get better and better in these areas. And I think because of that, the ceiling, again, like I've said multiple times, is super immense with Mathurin. We talked about some of Mathurin's flaws last season. Let's look at the Indiana Pacers in general last season and kind of what went right, what went wrong for this team. They were 35-47, so they finished 12 games below 500, but they were 8-7 in games decided by 3 points or less, which is a good sign too. Hey, the team performed decently well, or at least adequately, in some of those close, contested, clutch games. And that's even with Mathurin not shooting very well in the clutch. Tyrese Haliburton was a big-time clutch player, had actually a positive plus-minus in the clutch. And because of that, I think the Pacers going forward, you can feel pretty confident about them being a team that they will pull out a good amount of close games because of who they have on their existing roster. But they were 9-25 in games decided by 10-plus points, and that is a big problem for this team. They were also a team that, when Tyrese Haliburton played, they went 500. They were 28-28, and without him, they went 9-17, which is about a 27% win percentage. So they're very reliant on Tyrese Haliburton, which is partially what I think led them to drafting what they did this year. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And then one really important stat, and I think this is a good sign for Pacers fans. They were 17-14 versus sub-500 teams, and that's not a great mark, but it's definitely not a bad one. The Pacers were beating other teams below 500 at an improved rate compared to some of the other below 500 teams. The Pacers took care of business against some teams that they were better than, and I think as their young guys continue to grow and as their chemistry continues to mesh together better and better, this team is going to be able to take further strides forward, and as long as they can continue to beat teams that they're flat out better than, the win-loss record can end up looking a lot better at the end of the season. I think a team to look at in that regard, the Cleveland Cavaliers last year went 30-5 against teams that were below 500. That is an elite mark. They actually had a losing record against above 500 teams, but they took care of business against the bad teams, and I think that's something, if you're a Pacers fan, that's what you should be hoping for from Indiana next season, is can they beat the sub-500 teams, and then off of that, where does their record land? I think if they continue to beat the sub-500 teams and even improve on that mark, they could be a really, really good team next season. So what are some of the deficiencies? And it's really on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that's something we're going to talk about here with what they were not good at. Statistically, they were bottom 10 in both opponents' points off of turnovers, which is really alarming because remember, Tyrese Haliburton, a 4.15 assist to turnover ratio, he doesn't turn over the ball a ton. So the fact that they were still one of the worst teams in terms of defending fast breaks and defending against turnovers, that's really problematic. The Pacers have to take strides forward there. That's on Rick Carlisle to put together a competitive team that is going to, and a competitive scheme that's going to limit some of those opposition points in fast break and transition scenarios. And then one of the biggest flaws, and again, this is why I've critiqued Tyrese Haliburton on his rebounding already a couple of times in this video, they ranked dead last in the NBA when it came to opponent offensive rebounding percentage. And that's a problem. You just can't have that if you're the Indiana Pacers. Stops are such a vital aspect to this team. Now, the point of attack defense wasn't great. The rim protection was pretty good with Myles Turner, but you think about it from a schematic standpoint, if Myles Turner is consistently having to roam over to try and block and challenge shots at the rim as a help guy, then you need your guards, you need your wings, you need your corner sitters to do a good job of cracking back on other bigs, putting their body on guys, and boxing out. And those were things that the Pacers did not do last year. But luckily for them, they had a pretty good acquisition in the offseason in Bruce Brown, somebody who is a scrappy, tenacious defender who does a good job getting his hands on the basketball, both in the passing lanes, on the ball itself, and as a rebounder. And I think as a small guard, he's going to do a lot of really good things for this Pacers team that's going to help them win a good number of games, win more games specifically than they did a year ago. And I think, people freaked out about the contract. It was a great contract. It was a no-brainer contract for the Indiana Pacers. I think it was one of the better moves of the offseason. Getting him on a short-term deal was an absolute home run for Indiana. He makes them more competitive now. If it goes well, you can keep him going into next season. If it doesn't, you wash your hands of it. But my expectation right now is it's going to go very, very well because Bruce Brown's just flat out a good player and somebody who I think is going to help them a lot as a player who also drives the basketball very well. 6.6 drives per game this past season. He also shot 37% on catch-and-shoot threes for Denver a year ago. And you might say, well, that was playing off of Nikola Jokic. Well, luckily, it's not getting much worse. Playing with Tyrese Haliburton, the catch-and-shoot threes are going to be there for Bruce Brown. And as long as he can continue to cash them in the way that he did this most recent season, Brown's going to be a huge impact player for the Indiana Pacers in 2023 and 2024. Then let's talk about this team's identity. And this is really one of the most important parts of the video going into 2023-2024. What is this Pacers team going to look to do? And they're really building off of something they did at an elite level last year, which was playing in transition offensively. Last year, they ranked first in the NBA at over 18 fast break points per game, which is an elite mark. About 15% of their total points last year were scored in transition, which is really awesome. And it's a testament to not only Tyrese Haliburton, but the offensive scheme installed by Rick Carlisle and the ability of guys like TJ McConnell, Andrew Nembhard to also run the show in that capacity. And then also some of the other players that they have on their roster to kind of finalize and capitalize on those. Hield, Mathurin, and Haliburton combined for over 10 fast break points a game across the three of them. All of them around 3 point and change fast break points per game. Then you also add in the fact that they've gotten better in transition with some of the additions that they made this year. Bruce Brown, 3.4 fast break points per game. Really good transition player. Last year he was catching a lot of touchdown passes from Nikola Jokic. This year it's going to look a little bit different, but I think he's going to do a nice job kind of running the middle of the floor for them and also being somebody who can push himself in transition, which I think is going to be a nice situation. I also think he's going to create more deflections and do some things that the Pacers typically themselves haven't done as much when it comes to generating fast break opportunities. And then you also throw in a guy like Obi Toppin, 2.3 fast break points per game, and he gives them something completely different from what they have on the roster, and that is a vertical monster, somebody who just jumps out of the gym. And for Indiana, they've got good athletes on this team. They've got guys with a lot of skill, but they don't have an Obi Toppin, or at least they didn't. They do now, and he's somebody who I think is going to be able to get up and cause some havoc on the rim. And for playing with a guy like Tyrese Haliburton, Haliburton's just going to throw the ball up at the rim and say, hey, Obi Toppin's up there somewhere. Haliburton himself even tweeted that. And I really do think that this is going to give a completely different dynamic to the Pacers offense and their transition game as a serious, dangerous lob threat, somebody who's going to finish a ton of those lobs that are thrown up at the rim. And playing above the rim is just something the Pacers did not do a ton of This past season, Myles Turner threw down some dunks, of course. Isaiah Jackson can play above the rim a bit. But overall, I still think this team needed one more guy who could do that, and they got a very intriguing one in Obi Toppin, who his minutes just haven't been there. When he was playing with the Knicks, he was kind of logjam behind Julius Randle his entire tenure there, and he didn't get a lot of run for Tom Thibodeau. And I think going to an offense designed by Rick Carlisle is going to be fantastic for Obi Toppin. I'm buying all the Obi Toppin stock in the world. I think he's going to have a fantastic and tremendous season this next year for the Indiana Pacers, and I think playing with Haliburton is going to go a long way in unlocking some of the things we saw from Obi Toppin pre-draft as a Dayton Flyer. Talking about pre-draft, there were some players pre-draft that I thought would have been awesome for the Indiana Pacers, and they ended up drafting two guys in the first round this year, and I think they're going to both be impact rookies. We're looking at Jarace Walker, who they drafted out of Houston in the top 10 after trading down with Washington. And then in the 20s, they also drafted Ben Sheppard from Belmont. And if you know anything about Belmont, you know they produce offensive players and guys who are going to have an impact on that end of the floor. And I do like this quite a bit for the Indiana Pacers. Jarace Walker specifically, let's go back to some of those defensive deficiencies we talked about and kind of point of attack defense. Bring another guy who can crack back on the boards. Bring another guy who can help protect the rim a bit. He does a lot of those things. He is a good athlete, strong, physical. I think he's going to help the team a lot in some of those defensive areas that they need help with. And he's going to be a really tremendous player for them there. And then we look at a guy like Ben Sheppard, who, again, for Belmont, offensively, he did a lot of things. And honestly, pre-draft, I kind of compared him a little bit to a kind of worse Tyrese Haliburton, almost think Haliburton light, the free version of the app, right? That's what I kind of looked at Ben Sheppard as, because he has some of that same size, height, length, but he's just a skilled shot maker. Shot above 40% from three for Belmont a year ago, and I think he's going to probably be a surprise rookie. If he made no rookie team, I don't think I'd really be shocked. Now, I'm not sure what his role is going to look like with this team. He does have to fight for minutes with guys like TJ McConnell, Andrew Nembhard. Of course, Haliburton's going to log a ton of the point guard minutes, but I think this Pacers team is just loaded with players that I really liked. And as I opened the video, you guys know I'm a big believer in this team. But as I opened with, I love the depth on this team, specifically looking across the table at the sheer volume of players that they have that are quality NBA players. I want to start with Andrew Nembhard. He has a 52.2% pass percentage on drives, which he has 8.3 drives per game. And if we remember what we talked about earlier with Tyrese Haliburton, I praised his pass percentage on drives. Well, Nembhard's is even higher. Nembhard, another cerebral point guard, really good feel for the game, understands that, hey, if I draw a second defender, someone's likely open, and he does a good job making the right read out of that. Of course, Nembhard was kind of lighting the world on fire to start the year last year. I think universally people accept the fact that the Pacers got a huge steal for themselves in the second round with Nembhard. I like him quite a bit. He had 8.7 potential assists per game last year. Now, of course, the assist numbers weren't there because of missed shots, but he generated a lot of looks. And I think that's really the most important thing when you're evaluating a point guard or, a facilitator, is how many looks is he generating a game. And nearly 9 potential assists per game as a backup point guard is a really good number to strive for. And then let's talk about their other backup point guard, and I've loved this player for a long time, and that's TJ McConnell, who he does a really great job increasing the pace that this team plays with. I've always been a big TJ McConnell fan. He's got a good assist to turnover ratio, which is exactly what you look for in a backup point guard, nearly 13 drives per game as well. So him and Nembhard together are getting nearly 20 paint touches a game, which is very impressive for a backup backcourt. I think that they do a lot of nice things. And the Pacers bench last year was pretty competitive, I would say. They did a lot of good stuff. Of course, Mathurin was coming off the bench last year too. They did a lot of nice things, that trio together, and I do really like what this team has off the bench for them. And I also want to highlight some of TJ McConnell's scoring and what he does with the basketball. Everyone loved to praise LeBron James for that turnaround, fall away mid-range that he hit off of a drive. That's just TJ McConnell's patented move. I swear to God, I've seen TJ McConnell do that 500 times in my life. TJ McConnell is such an interesting player because his shot selection is so different than the norm. of the NBA, and I think he's a really crafty player. Typically, you hear that with all the white guys, but he really is crafty, and I think he's just a flat-out good basketball player in general. Then I want to look at the backup big men a little bit. Jalen Smith and Isaiah Jackson. Isaiah Jackson had 1.5 blocks per game on pretty low volume, low minutes per game. So Isaiah Jackson, pre-draft, I loved him as a potential rim deterrent guy. He's done a good job of that so far in his career. He also is averaging 1.15 points per possession as a roll man in the pick and roll. So when he sets a screen, the offense typically does pretty well. 1.15 is right around some of the better offenses in the league. And then the two of them together, Jalen Smith, 14.6% rebounding percentage on total rebounds, so offensive and defensive rebounding percentage. Isaiah Jackson, 12.8% total rebound percentage. So that's an area where I need to see these two guys take steps forward. They've got to get a little bit better at cleaning up the glass, and I think that's going to be a challenge for them. Of course, Isaiah Jackson, pretty slight and slim, and he's trying to block a lot of shots, so he's not going to rebound at the highest level possible. But I think Jalen Smith, his rebounding, I still think there's more room for him to grow in that area as well. Let's talk about a guy in Aaron Nesmith who was a real great acquisition for them. You could also highlight a guy like Jordan Nwora, who was another nice acquisition at the trade deadline for them. They've got guys who can shoot, and I highlighted earlier how they had 9 guys shooting 2.8 threes a game or more. Guys like Nesmith and Nwora do go a long way in just contributing to spacing, and even when you have guys who maybe they're not starting level players, they can still be really nice pieces to a team, especially when they fit your team identity and playing off of a star like Haliburton. Also a fun little nugget here, Aaron Nesmith scored 1.40 points per possession in isolation this past year. Now, it was really low volume. So let's pump the brakes a little bit on Aaron Nesmith, but I'm kind of adding a little bit of fuel to the fire here as well with that little statistic in there. I do really like what this team has in general. Aaron Nesmith's a talented player, just up and down the roster. It feels like they got like 13 guys that I would want to play NBA minutes, and that's a really good thing to have. And we're going to talk about kind of the consequences of that here in a second, but for my 2023-2024 predictions, at minimum, I think very worst case scenario, assuming health, very worst case scenario, the Pacers are a play-in team. Now, I do think that they have a legit shot at being a potential top 6 team in the Eastern Conference, although the pathway to getting there is very hard. You've got teams like Atlanta in front of you. They do have to pass Toronto, who I do think Toronto got worse, but Dennis Schroeder was a pretty nice recovery move for them. We'll see if they end up trading Siakam or not. Then you also have to look at some of the other teams ahead of them, Cleveland, New York, Brooklyn. We'll see what Brooklyn ends up looking like this year. Will Mikal Bridges be a good enough number 1 player for them? That's a big question, right? Now, I also think Haliburton draws some All-NBA consideration, and that's a really important note for this year. If he does make All-NBA, he actually gets the Supermax rookie extension, which would escalate to $260 million over 5 years instead of $207 million. So if you're looking at a small market team like Indiana wanting to keep and pay everyone, that's a really important note. I actually think best case scenario for Indiana, Haliburton does not make All-NBA this year. They're able to keep him at a lower number in the $40 million range rather than the $50-60 million range, and it helps them kind of build out the rest of their team over time. But at the end of the day, Haliburton, he might just be good enough where he gets that All-NBA designation as soon as this next season. Bennedict Mathurin is going to take steps forward. You guys heard me and how positive I am on him. I think he's an elite young player. I think he's going to grow into a really good player in general in the NBA. At worst, a good starter, and at his ceiling, probably a multi-time All-Star if he ever gets there. I think both Jarace Walker and Ben Sheppard flash. Now, they're going to do it in completely opposite ways. Ben Sheppard's going to have nights where he doesn't miss. He's going to have nights where he makes a bunch of great passes, and he's going to be a really fun offensive player. Jarace Walker, he's going to have some offensive moments, but really the flashes for him are going to be on the defensive side of the floor, blocking some shots, getting on the floor for loose balls. Now, he's going to have some awesome offensive moments too, where he's going to hit a post fade away. He's going to make a nice pass to a cutter. Jarace Walker does some really good things offensively. For me, the big question with him was, can he round out his game to a point where he's good at everything in the NBA? Because right now, and this is typically what we see with a lot of fours, is they come in, they've got a pretty well-rounded skill set, but it's about taking the steps to, okay, you went from really well-rounded at the college game to can you be very good at the NBA level? And that's a tough ask for them, especially with what they have to do defensively, what they have to do offensively as well, kind of on and off the ball on both sides of the floor. There's a lot of responsibilities on them. And then I think the most important nugget on here, even more important than the Haliburton All-NBA consideration, is will the Pacers ever make a big swing? And I think that they are one of the best positioned teams in the NBA to do so. They have control of a lot of their picks. They've got a lot of young, intriguing players that other teams would value. They've got some contracts that can match if you want to. They could operate with cap space again next offseason. Potentially, there's going to be some rumors. At some point in the near future, this is one of the most important predictions of the entire video, the Pacers are going to be lined up to make a trade. And I'm not talking for just a star level player. I'm talking a superstar. I'm talking a top 10, top 15 player in the world, being able to pair him with Tyrese Haliburton. They're in a position to do that with their draft capital and the young pieces that they have to send out in a trade. Now, people are going to point to OG Anunoby. That's not the type of trade I'm talking about here. OG Anunoby could help this team. They could potentially make a run at him in free agency next year. I don't think that they need to make a big trade for him. And if it costs Bennedict Mathurin, then I definitely would not do that. I think the Pacers should be patient, but I think we're going to start to hear some buzz about them being a big-time trade. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I had a lot of fun recording this Pacers season preview. Remember, this was the first one on the channel for this upcoming season. Make sure you guys leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. Let me know down in the comment section below which team you would like to see me do next. Again, I really hope you enjoyed. Pacers fans, let me know in the comment section how I did in this video. And then also make sure you guys check out some of the previous videos on the channel. Either check out the previous video or my suggestion here on the right side. That subscribe button's right there in the middle for you as well. So make sure you click that so you get the latest in the sports world here at Utility Sports.